pause for a while and feel the presence of God for the opening prayer to be led by Miss Diwani Manuel.
Let us pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. As we gather here in the harbor of your safety, we thank you for fellowship and family. We ask that you will strengthen us, restore us, and inspire us with your love. Lord, would you fill us with your peace so that as we journey onwards, we would pour out your love and grace to others. We ask that our souls would catch the wind of your spirit so that we would take the promises to all the earth. Heavenly Father, we pray for protection against COVID-19. We know that only you have the power to heal our countrymen afflicted with the disease and prevent it from spreading. We pray for your grace to guide the hands of the medical experts, scientists, and agencies trying to find a cure and solution to this pandemic. Grant us the grace not to lose hope. Give this nation strength and protection. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Once again, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great pride and honor to introduce to you our speaker for today's webinar. Our speaker has 31 years of combined academic, consulting, and training experience in schools and various organizations. With a PhD Organization Development at Southeast Asia Interdisciplinary Development Institute. He has helped academic institutions, corporations, and government and non-government organizations in their organizational development requirements. Currently, he is engaged with the several schools in as OD consultant. He obtained his master's degree in philosophy at the Ateneo de Manila University. He is a former lecturer also at the Ateneo de Manila University. And he was a visiting professor at Malay College, Long Island, New York, United States of America. He is currently the Director for Human Resources, Chief Risk Management Officer, and Data Protection Officer of Miriam College. He is also a professor at the College of Business, Entrepreneurship, and Accountancy of Miriam College. He is also the Chair of Committee on Institutional Management Concerns of SEAP-NCR and accreditor for the Philippine Council for NGO Accreditation. He is a certified international human resources manager confirmed by the American Certification Institute. Friends, please welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Noel C. Bracho.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's it's good that we're doing this despite the difficult situation we find ourselves into. Just allow me to briefly explain the platform we're using right now. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Zoom, but perhaps you're using the meeting platform. That was my original intention, to use the meeting platform for the seminar. But that one, I will have less control, and so I decided to shift to webinar. That's the reason why you were given a new ID number. Later this afternoon, no, for the second part, I probably will shift to the meeting platform. As I understand, educators normally cannot really hold on to themselves and would like to immediately share. So, for purposes of for purposes of so that we are able to level off, these are some reminders and protocol during the webinar. Your microphone is muted while session is ongoing unless you wish to share If you wish to talk, you raise your hand using the command on Zoom. I'll be able to see it from my end, and then I will allow you to speak. Okay, so you just have to navigate the commands under the Zoom platform, and you will see that part. Um, you are also allowed to record the whole seminar. I think it's from your end. If you want to share a document, press share screen, but I doubt it if we will do it this morning, perhaps later for the second session. And then, as in any virtual platform, connectivity might become unstable. Before the beginning of the webinar, I've been getting messages that the audio is not good. I mean, that's part and parcel of using virtual platform when you do certain gathering. So, I mean, that's a given. So we'll just have to bear with the limitation of the virtual platform. And then, of course, I hope you will enjoy the seminar. The seminar is really about when I was asked by Rex, I thought I'd like to share with you the whole context of institutional resiliency. And I'd like to underscore that resiliency is really the capacity of institutions, and in this particular case, schools, to flourish during and after a crisis. I like the term flourish, but this is not easy to define at this point in time. How can you flourish or thrive in a given situation, particularly for schools, who I think will greatly be affected with the move of the with the later opening of classes sometime in June. So we're facing a from a financial vantage point, schools will have problems with cash flow. So how can you flourish during and after a crisis? But that's really the whole point of institutional resiliency. For the first part, I think it's I think it's going to be more of just asking ourselves. I think on a personal level and even looking at our schools, did we prepare enough for any crisis that we can think of? So we do some hindsight thinking and just ask ourselves, did we see this coming? Or do we have all the resources, infrastructure to be able to continue operation despite being in a crisis? At the end of the day, the true measure of institutional resiliency is our capacity to pass the test of time. Whatever it is, no, that we might find ourselves into in the lifespan of the institution's life. So today, we shall explore key factors that are critical to building resilience. I'm taking my perhaps my role as chief risk manager when I begin to talk about resiliency. I think, and this is Filipino mindset, sometimes we know what's coming, but we don't really prepare for it. Ito yung sinasabi nating bahala na. No? Bahala na si Batman. So, there are certain things that are not oblivious to us, but sometimes we try to just ignore and then find ourselves in a more difficult situation. So I'd like to, for us to reflect and just identify what factors are critical in building institutional resiliency. And then later, when we take a break at 11 o'clock, you probably will have to work with your group and try to draft initial pathways to respond to the new normal. The immediate environment would be COVID-19, but beyond COVID-19, you're also looking at other crisis situations. And I think the question is, have we exhausted? Have we looked into all possible risks that the institution might encounter in the future. So these are the two objectives we wish to accomplish today. Just exploring the key factors that are critical to building resilience and then try to draft initial pathways. Okay, I'll be using COVID-19 pandemic as a starting point in trying to understand a crisis. I think we have to level up and then agree on what do we really mean by crisis. Okay. I'm sure you know this already. We've been bombarded with a lot of information about COVID-19. It has become global in its magnitude, and they're saying no, this is the second biggest challenge since we faced World War II. Um, and we know that this actually started in China, and that we started knowing about it in December. Okay, lucky for Antarctica because they have not been infected by the virus, and then we're seeing more and more cases coming up. Um, because of that, countries are racing to slow the spread of the virus by testing and treating patients, carrying out contact tracing, quarantining citizens, etc. And I think this is our common experience right now. All of us are in extreme community quarantine. So, and it has affected many of our activities, both personal and institutional. Graduations have been suspended, or I think eventually it will not push through. And then we're seeing also a changing configuration of relationships. Third is that we know that COVID-19 is not just a health crisis. When you look at the implications of the crisis right now, people are beginning to experience economic, social, and political crisis attendant to the health crisis. Many people have lost their jobs. Okay, people not having enough savings, uh, people not getting their salary at this point in time. And we're also seeing some political struggles in some countries and even in the Philippines. So we're looking at a bigger magnitude of the impact of COVID-19. For us academicians, for schools, for educators, we know the, the deep impact of COVID-19. It, it runs across all the operational aspects of our institution. Talk about enrollment, you talk about finances, you talk about salaries, etc. So it's going to be difficult for many schools trying to balance the interest of the institution for sustainability, but at the same time looking at our students and parents who might have been greatly affected by the crisis. So what are we saying now? Until now, there are new, there are ongoing studies trying to understand the coronavirus, COVID-19. And as of this morning, when I was reading some articles, what they have found out is that the symptoms are also growing. In other words, we have not really made a full understanding of the behavior of the virus. And so that's why it's also difficult for the government to make certain decisions as to whether you extend the extreme community quarantine, because you might be looking at a surge that has happened in other countries. So, um, and I think this has become commonplace. Every day people are losing jobs and income, and the uncertainty of going back to a normal situation. But we know that we will never go back to the pre-lockdown condition. I mean, that's a thing of the past, and let's not try to go back to that situation. One of the things that make it difficult for institutions to move forward is they still want to retain the normal situation prior to the crisis. And so it's difficult for them to shift. The first thing that has to change is the way we look at reality. Okay? We have to have that insight, we have to have that understanding that things will never be the same again. Having said that, we let's look at the elements, no, of a crisis. We were hearing about COVID-19, but it only hit us hard when the lockdown was announced because all of us felt threatened by it. All of a sudden, certain choices were to be made, and time was not on our side. Things just moved quite quickly. Government making decisions for us. And there was really not enough time until this lockdown and trying to understand how things will move forward beyond the lockdown. We realize also that it is a serious threat personally, but also to the organization. And now that we're moving towards the end of the ECQ, we're trying to second guess, what is it like after ECQ? When do we go back to work? Um, when you see the new criteria of the new normal, you begin to realize it's not going to be easy. Let me just share what we did, I think 2 days ago. So I asked my staff, 50% of my staff went to work. I was included. And just not went to work, but went to the office. So we are 10 in the office. So I asked 4 to go to the office. And we tried to simulate physical distancing within the office. And what we found out was really the difficulty of doing that. And so we have to constantly remind each other physical distancing. And I think what was difficult to swallow was when we had to take our lunch. We had to take our lunch individually. Knowing that you're with other office mates, but you can't eat with them. So it's going to affect the way we deal with people. And I think institutionally, the impact is greater on the institution. But we're also hearing some people really being affected already mentally. Mental health crisis na rin sila. And that is understandable, lalo na when you have limited choices. And this is the most challenging. We do not have control over the behavior of the virus. We do not know when it will end. People are saying we will be able to find the vaccine within 2 years, but that does not mean the crisis is over. So there is that element of not being in control of reality. Now, when you look at all these experiences, you now see that one, a crisis is a crisis because there is an element of surprise. All of us were surprised. Okay? Especially nung nag-lockdown na. That's when we realize, oh, grabe na pala itong COVID-19. Second, as we've seen in COVID-19 pandemic, short decision time. Decisions were made quickly. In schools, we had to end the school year. We had to think of refunding our students. We had short time to decide on other alternative because the pressure was also, we had to succumb, for better for worse, to some pressure coming from different sectors within the school. Third is that we're seeing that it's going to threaten the survival of the school. When you want to understand why it's going to affect the survival of schools, It is essentially looking at what will be the main consideration of parents right now in terms of their children. It's going to be safety and health. In fact, um, many parents and even students are willing to sit out a year, not go to school, just so they are safe in their own homes. And so, therefore, it threatens the survival of schools because the direct impact would be enrollment, and we will have to struggle with that uncertainty. And then last, of course, is uncertainty. Okay, so we're looking at uncertainty in resources, uncertainty of when it will end, uncertainty also of how one will be infected by the virus. No? So these are the elements of a crisis. There's an element of surprise. We only have a short time to make decisions. We see that there is really threat to the survival of schools. And number four, it's the uncertainty that goes with a crisis, with a crisis. Oh, by the way, if you have questions and if you want to share something, you can just raise your hand and I'll uh, call you. So, having understood the elements of a crisis, how do you manage a crisis? Okay, I will not give you answers to that, but just try to collectively reflect later. Um, when you look at managing crisis, first there has to be an acceptance that we have been disrupted because it is an unexpected event. No? That the term is disruption. No? Crisis will always bring disruption, and the impact will be across all stakeholders of the organization, and in this case of schools, students, employees, faculty, administrators, parents, alumni. They will be affected. Okay, so when you understand crisis as a disruption, you know that things will never be the same. Things will never be the same. Okay, that's the core of a crisis, in disruption. And managing the crisis means, what do you make sense out of this disruption? Okay, when you look at the flip side of crisis, when you look at disruption, you may also want to see what opportunities may be generated from the disruption. Okay, I'll just give you a concrete example. But of course, this will not be in favor of the institution. When we shift to online learning, education becomes cheaper compared to the traditional face-to-face engagement. There's going to be less expenses on the part of parents. Okay, it's safer. So that's going to be the preference. Okay, so therefore you cannot collect fees like we used to do in the past. I mean, the fees last school year 1920, you cannot collect them anymore, at least for some, sa 2021. At least in the initial months of the school year, I think all will have to do online. Yeah? I hear people say that they would probably go full online first quarter. Some would say until December, and then they move to blended learning. So the crisis can bring you to a situation where you are also challenged to think beyond the box. And when you do that, that means you're also looking at some opportunities and some possibilities. So if institutions would always go back and say and would talk about this should not have happened, let's go back to this situation where you're losing time, no? Because now when you talk of crisis management, you also talk about priority management. When you talk about priority management, you talk about precious resources. So mahusay yung mga eskwelahan na this time malinaw na sa kanila kung ano yung tatakbuhin ng kanilang school year 2020-2021. Yung iba are still finding out what to do. What is the best and appropriate platform for the continuity of learning. But the more challenging part would be how do we now handle our faculty, employees, and personnel? Later, we'll probably zero in on the months of June and July. Because essentially, you now have at least 2 months. My assumption is quite clear. When you look at school year 1920, you should have budgeted the entire school year. So in other words, the school should be capable of paying all employees until end of May 31. You will have a problem in June, July, and this will be a problem of cash flow because you don't have the ready cash. Because normally, when June is the opening, you more or less have enrollees already, no? You know, probably April, May. And so you have a bit of cash. This time, you don't have enough money. So what do you do in June and July, assuming you will open in August? Okay, it's a transition. In fact, questions like, what do we do with employees who are on probationary engagement? How do we tell them? Or we have talked to some teachers renewal, but we're not sure of the enrollment. How do we tell them, or how do we keep them, etc.? Crisis management originated in large-scale industrial and environmental disaster in the 1980s. I think initially when we talk of crisis, we always talk about the environment, we talk about disasters, etc. But crisis also extended its scope to even look at organizational crisis. No, labor cases would be a crisis point. Complaints from students would be crisis points. So things have also changed in the way we look at crisis. What's good about crisis is that it allows the institution to have this space for transformation. Okay? It's an opportunity for the institution to move from the old system to a new system. And this is essentially what we're saying, creating a new normal. Every after a crisis, you will always have a new normal. Things will never be the same. Okay? So, that's important for us to accept. No? Yung parang, let's forget about the pre-lockdown scenario, a situation that's not gonna come back. At least in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But crisis should allow us to transform the old system. Many things will no longer work, and many things will have to be set up. Now we realize why it was important before to set up a strong IT infrastructure, because this is a clear case where you need a strong IT infrastructure. But the online learning platform should have been thought long time ago and should have been integrated in the traditional educational system. Why? Because the Philippines is prone to natural disasters, floods, earthquake, etc. And even looking at these disasters, you could automatically shift to online learning, and so that you don't have to ask students to come in on a Saturday so that you can make up for the lost times because you didn't come to school. So this is essentially again, no, on hindsight, why didn't we do that before? Perhaps because that was not a priority. Perhaps because we did not see that it was a real threat. Okay? Japan is susceptible to earthquake, but Japan is the most resilient country in terms of responding to earthquakes. Why? They understood the science of earthquake and they have come up with protocols. And so damages to lives is normally minimal when Japan is hit by earthquake. But you have to invest because now we begin to see why, while it's important to invest on people, it's also important to invest on infrastructure. How do you get people together now? It's really using the virtual platforms. But if we did not invest on it, then it's also difficult to uh, to to relate, no, to people. This is, well, the basic problem we're facing now as a country. Napakahina ng ating internet connection. So that's one side lang of the whole context of looking at a crisis situation. I'd like to invite you to see the positive, well, not the positive, but you can also see the space of other possibilities of a crisis. And this is an opportunity for transformation. So what now? I think that's a question. We're faced with COVID-19. In the past, we've been faced with other crises. So what now? On hindsight, it's good for us to ask, what did we miss? What did we miss? Um, there is such a thing as cue sensitivity. It's the ability of people to see certain cues or certain signals. On hindsight, as an institution, I invite you to reflect and ask yourselves, what did we miss? Why didn't we prepare? Are we prepared for this kind of crisis? Second question, what did we see? Okay. The first question is, what did we miss? In other words, we didn't really saw that coming. Second is, we saw something,
But we
but how
failed to
come we
prepare.
failed to prepare ourselves for that eventuality? Alam na natin mangyayari, but we did not prepare. Third would be something that's more constructive and allowing us to move forward. What could have we done better? Again, on hindsight, what could we have done better? What could we have done better? So, after a crisis,